Told my family they're never meeting my son. Now they're angry about lost opportunities after abandoning me during my darkest times. In 2020, at the age of 35, I did something unforgivable to my own family. My addiction had completely taken over, and I resorted to stealing from those I loved just to fund my habit. I took electronics, old cell phones, a game console, and a Blu-ray player, all to score more heroin. There's no justification for what I did. I own those choices, and I accept everything that came with them. When the truth came out, the pain I saw in my parents' faces was devastating, but nothing compared to the hurt in my little sister's eyes. She was only 17 at the time, just a kid, seeing her world blown apart by her big brother's betrayal. My family made the decision to drop me off at a rehab center. I spent 3 months in there, detoxing and fighting my way back to sobriety. During that time, the silence from my family was absolute. I called, desperate to let them know I was trying, that I was alive, but I never got any answer. The day my program ended, I went back to my family's home, clinging to a hope that maybe, now that I was clean, I'd find some kind of welcome. Instead, they told me straight to my face that, for them, I was no longer family. I was ordered out of the house, told not to contact anyone. The door slammed shut behind me, and that was it. I tried to reach out to other relatives, my grandparents, but they had already heard from my parents, who warned everyone else that contact with me meant being cut off from the family entirely. The message was clear: I was on my own. The only glimpse into my family's life I had after that were through my mother's Facebook posts, where I watched from the outside, liking a post here or there just to feel close. That didn't last. I was told, in no uncertain terms, never to interact. Family members blocked me, and I was told to keep my distance. My world shattered. I ended up on the street, taking shelter where I could. I managed to scrape together enough work to earn a spot in a dingy apartment. Survival turned into rebuilding, slowly. Therapy became a lifeline to process the mountain of grief I carried with me. I threw myself into work and picked up my abandoned education online, finally nailing down the degree I'd left behind at 21. My hard work paid off. A great job offer pulled me several states away for a fresh start. 3 years ago, everything changed when I met the woman who's now my wife. Her own father wrestled with addiction, and that understanding opened her family's hearts to me. Last year we got married, and 3 months ago, I held my son for the first time. Becoming a dad eclipsed every other joy I'd known. I wanted to show him off to the world, so I plastered his photos all over social media. That's when the messages came rolling in. My parents wanted to meet my boy. Suddenly, after years of exile, they remembered I existed. But I remembered all too well the way they cut me off at my lowest, how they didn't just turn their backs, but made sure I had nowhere else to turn. I don't pretend to deserve their forgiveness, but I can't overlook how completely they abandoned me when I needed them most. I told them, in no uncertain and certainly not gentle terms, that they are not my real family anymore. They are not welcome anywhere near me, my wife, or my son. Now, the messages pile up every day, accusing me of never earning their love back or cheating them out of having a son again, telling me I owe them this chance. I owe them nothing. I'm standing firm. There will be no relationship, no reunion. Not now, not ever. There's been a torrent of opinions about what I should do, but my wife and I have decided to actually speak with my parents, just one video call, to lay everything out, discuss the last 5 years, and see where we all truly stand. For now, that's all I know. Once the dust settles, and we know where the future leads, I'll have more to say. Update 1. Let me shed light on a few things before closing this chapter of my life for good. There's been some confusion about my journey through rehab, and I want to set the record straight. My family didn't pay a cent for my treatment. Back then, I was making less than $20,000 a year and my employer only offered an HSA, no comprehensive coverage, so I qualified for Medicaid as soon as I moved out. That's how inpatient rehab was covered. It was Medicaid, not family money, that funded my treatment. Now, I want to briefly give some context that explains my father's mindset, which is foundational for understanding how our most recent conversation unfolded. My father emigrated from China to the United States to attend college. He absolutely despised the system he left behind, the government, communism, you name it. The US represented everything he dreamed of: opportunity, freedom, and a future he could shape himself. So he stayed, married an American woman, built his own business from the ground up. All of his hopes and dreams, his very legacy, hinged on one day passing this business to his son and then eventually down to his grandson, and so on. He was a relentless tiger parent. My mother, always docile and compliant, mirrored his approach. From the time I was a kid, my life was constructed around this expectation. It even dictated what university I would attend and what I'd major in. My path, my future, was never really mine. It was always about this legacy. That brings me to the recent call, a tense, uncomfortable conversation involving just me, my wife, and my father. Here's the essence of what he said. My bisexuality and my decision to leave college were, in his mind, betrayals of the life he tried to build for me. They were acts of ungratefulness. He felt that he'd shown me great mercy by not intervening sooner. My being bisexual had, in his eyes, still left room to marry a woman and create a family, so he didn't act on it. Even dropping out of college was forgivable if I could still take over the business, assuming I'd get help with the physical side of things. But none of that compared to what came next. When it came to my substance abuse, that was the breaking point. Stealing from my parents' house hurt him, but, ultimately, he saw it as trivial compared to the fact that I had used drugs at all. Using drugs made me unworthy of carrying on his legacy. According to him, it was enough to warrant cutting me out of the family completely. No length of sobriety or future success could redeem this in his eyes. I had, in his words, ruined his dream. Yet, in his twisted way, he insisted I owed him gratitude for at least leaving the family, that by stepping aside, I at least spared them the shame of an addict's presence. With the arrival of my son, the idea was raised that perhaps this legacy could someday skip me and carry on through my child. But, because of my history, my parents would need to be directly involved to properly raise him, to mold him into the heir I failed to become. I never even got to ask my mother about the messages she'd sent. The call ended abruptly when my wife realized the conversation was going nowhere. That weekend, I was in a dark place. There's no way to express how grateful I am that my wife was by my side. She helped keep me grounded, kept my mind from spiraling out of control. I made a vow to myself that I would spend the rest of my life being her anchor, just as she's been mine. Right now, that means doing all the housework and taking care of the baby while her body heals. And as our son grows, I'll keep finding ways to show her how much I appreciate her. Looking ahead, we made some decisions as a family. I decided I would cut back on work. I'm a technical writer now, a job I excel at, one that provides more than enough for us, even working less than full-time. Work used to be my painkiller, my way of avoiding the things I didn't want to face. But now, with a child, I know I need healthier coping mechanisms, so I'm dedicating more time to therapy to work on myself rather than burying myself in work. When it comes to my son, we both agreed, my parents won't be part of his life for the foreseeable future. We're not quite sure what we'll tell him when he's older, but as his personality develops, we'll work with a counselor, someone versed in child psychology, to figure out the healthiest way to approach the topic without causing him distress or confusion. We also talked about the family name. A few ideas were tossed around, including the possibility of me taking my wife's surname, but in the end, we decided on something else, a new family name, a real fresh start, a new legacy. We haven't settled on one yet, but we hope to make that decision by year's end. That's where things stand now. I can say with certainty that I know who I am and the man I continue to become, a devoted father, a loving husband, someone with a disease that shaped my past but won't dictate my future. The trust of others may be hard to earn again, but I'm committed to being the best version of myself for my family, for as long as I live. And that's all that matters to me. Update 2. 2 mornings ago, at 8:11, I had my son in the sling and a pot of oatmeal on the stove when there was a knock that didn't sound like a neighbor. Through the peephole I saw a woman with a badge lanyard and a man with a notebook. They introduced themselves as Child Protective Services and a patrol officer for the welfare check. An anonymous report had come in about recent drug use and an unsafe environment for an infant. My heart dropped straight through my ribs. I set the burner off, took one breath, and let them in. They were professional, calm. They looked at the crib, the outlets, the cabinet locks I installed the week we came home from the hospital. They asked about substances in the house, so I unlocked the little safe with my wife's postpartum meds and the naloxone I keep because I refuse to ever be the one unprepared. They asked me about my history, and I told them the truth in plain language, because lying to make this go away would feel exactly like the thing that almost killed me. They asked to speak to my wife alone. I took my son to the balcony and showed him the trees while my legs shook like they would give out. The caseworker handed us her card and said she had to write a report, but she didn't have any immediate concerns. She said, softly, like a person who has seen this, sometimes families try to use the system to settle their own punishments. When the door closed, I slid to the floor and laughed once, a broken little sound that didn't belong to Joy or anything close to it. Then I got up, called a family lawyer, and booked the soonest appointment. By lunch, a certified letter landed in our mailbox from a law firm 3 towns over. The gist: my parents intend to pursue grandparent visitation to ensure the proper upbringing of their biological grandson. It read like a demand wrapped in etiquette. My wife read it, handed it back, and we looked at each other the way you do before you carry a couch down a staircase. You can't make it lighter, so you brace and lift together. That night, I got an email from a name I didn't recognize, a university address I didn't have. It was my sister. She'd borrowed a friend's account and left every identifying detail out of the message, but it was her voice on the page. She said she was in town for a research symposium. She said she hadn't known about the call. She said she had to see me. We met in a coffee shop with too many plants and a barista who wore glitter on his cheekbones like war paint. I didn't know if she would actually come through the door until she did, and then she was in my arms, no little sister anymore, just a woman I missed graduating from her own life. I brought my son because I didn't want to hide him. She cried quietly like it hurt less to keep it inside. We didn't spend much time on the past. She told me what mattered. Dad had been pushing hard behind the scenes. He'd asked her to collect anything online that made me look unfit, a sloppy joke I made in 2012, a poem I wrote in rehab, any picture with a beer in someone else's hand, and when she wouldn't, he told her she was choosing me over family. He'd said the words petition and rights like he was assembling furniture, straightforward, impersonal, inevitable. She said Mom didn't know about the CPS call. She believed that because she could tell when Mom was complicit and when Mom was just surviving. She also told me something that made the room go still. She's in love with a woman, Dad suspects it and has started laying out a life for her that fits inside the business like a coffin fits a person. We sat there a long time. I watched my son sleep on my chest while the two of us made a plan that didn't need to be complicated. She would get her own passwords back. She would tuck away the kind of money you keep as an emergency exit in your shoe. She would not carry messages for anyone. I told her I wasn't asking her to pick a side. I was offering her my couch, my guest room, my spare key if it ever came to it. She laughed and said she'd take my wife's lasagna before she took my couch, which made me love her more. On the way home I thought about names. The lawyer had told me what I'd suspected. In our state, without a pre-existing relationship with the child, grandparents don't get special rights just because they want them. Contacting CPS like that was ugly, but it also documented exactly why we were putting legal boundaries up. We scheduled the petition for a restraining order if they escalated. We secured the pediatrician's records and flagged our file. Then we did something I didn't expect would make me feel peace. We went to the courthouse and started the paperwork for the new name. We made our choice standing at a counter that smelled like old envelopes. It isn't my wife's name or my father's and doesn't belong to any history I have to bend my son into. It's short and clean and means exactly what I want the next years to be, hale and whole, chosen on purpose. When I signed it, when my wife signed it, when we said our son's full name out loud in the parking lot, it sounded like a door closing somewhere behind us without slamming. It sounded like a house we get to build. I did hear from my mother, finally, not on video, not a call that could be overheard, but a letter with ink smudges where her hand must have rested too long. She didn't ask to see my son. She didn't defend my father. She wrote down a memory I didn't know she'd kept, me at 5, asleep in a laundry basket because I wanted to be warm like clothes, her carrying me to bed, the way my tiny hands hung heavy around her neck. She wrote that she cannot undo what she didn't do, but she can choose not to harm us now. Included was a phone number that she said existed for emergencies only, and the last line was, I am learning to be brave in small ways. I don't know what will come of that. I don't know if bravery turns into leaving after 30 years or if it stays a tiny candle in a house with the blinds drawn. I know this, my son's heartbeat against my chest is the metronome I live by now. If anyone tries to tune us to their rhythm again, I will be the one to say no. If the people who raised me decide to become people who respect us, they can do that work on their side of the fence. Update 3. At 9:02 a.m. The clerk mispronounced my son's new last name and I corrected him without apologizing. The courtroom smelled like old carpet and copier toner. The judge wore a tie the color of a bruise. Opposing counsel had the smooth face of a man who never has to carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs. He tried to say words like continuity and culture and biological right with his hands folded like a prayer he didn't believe in. My lawyer said the only words that mattered, best interest, no existing relationship, documented harassment. He slid the CPS report across the table so gently it looked like a kindness. They called my father to speak. He stood, buttoned a jacket that didn't fit his posture anymore, and told the judge that a legacy was not a toy. He said my child belonged to a line, and lines are not subject to moods. The judge took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose the way men do who have seen everything twice. Then he said my son's first name correctly and our last name again, the right way this time. He said he didn't see an emergency to justify anything temporary. He said, without looking at anyone in particular, that calling CPS as a tactic is a cruelty the court remembers. He set a date 6 weeks out for a full hearing and ordered no contact until then beyond attorneys. When we stood to leave, my legs did not shake. On the way to the elevator, an officer with a sunspot on his cheek told us the fastest route to the parking garage. We rounded a corner and ran right into my father. He had something small in his hand, jade on a red string, the kind of amulet Chinese aunties tie to crib rails. He tried to press it into my palm. He said, in a voice I recognized from years ago when a teacher wronged me and he marched into school to fix it, this is for protection. I closed my fingers around my wife's hand instead. I told him, softly so it wouldn't echo, that protection comes from people who don't break you to prove they care. Security walked him back toward the bench with the fishbowl of mints. The jade swung once and kept swinging as he let it go. We left it there. That afternoon my sister sent a voice memo that broke open one more door. It was my father's voice, low and contained, instructing someone to make the call because the state is obliged to intervene when a parent is compromised. He used the tone he saves for accountants and men at the parts warehouse. My sister had set her phone down by a stack of invoices and hit record when he stepped into the office with our mother standing so still she could have been framed. There was a scrape of a chair, then the hollow ring of silence when everyone knows someone else has done something unforgivable and no one is going to say it out loud. Our lawyer filed the memo under an exhibit tab the color of a stop sign. 3 hours later, without us asking, the court clerk called to say the judge had signed a temporary protective order and service would be attempted by morning. That night, I slept on the living room floor between the sofa and the bassinet. Not because I was afraid, exactly. Because I wanted my ear next to the hum of the baby monitor and the radiator knocking like it was settling into a new name along with us. At 2:14 a.m., the emergency number my mother gave me lit up. No voice. Just a picture message of a key on her palm, the caption, "For me, not for you." I wrote back one sentence, "I am proud of you anyway." The dots bubbled and disappeared. I put the phone down and listened to my son breathe. The next day, my father mailed things. They arrived in 3 separate envelopes: a photocopy of a family tree with our branch whited out, a check with more zeros than anything he sent me in 10 years, a glossy pamphlet from the church they go to now, dog-eared at a page about prodigals. I handed everything to our lawyer unopened, except for the tree. I held it up to the window light and you could see our names faint and ghostly beneath the correction fluid, like text under old paint. I slid it back in and sealed the flap and wrote "Return to sender" in block letters that looked like somebody else's. On Saturday, we hosted our son's 100 days in a backyard that isn't ours, in a house that absolutely is my in-laws, with a grill that complains but still does its job. We had red paper napkins and a cake that didn't look like anything except sugar and love. My sister came. She brought a woman with eyes like late summer. She introduced her as her friend and then didn't correct herself when my wife said, "It's good to finally meet you." They stood at the edge of the lawn and held hands like a secret that had decided it was done hiding. My mother did not come. Later I found a brown paper bag at the back steps with a square object wrapped in a dish towel. Inside was a chop, an old stone name stamp, my Chinese given name carved in reverse, the one my father used when he inked the lids of jars he sent back to his village the first years he was here. There was no note, only the dish towel smelling faintly of her detergent from when I was a kid. The stamp was cool in my hand. I put it on the mantle and told my wife we would teach our son what it is when he cares to ask, and that we will tell the story the way it deserves to be told, as an artifact, not an anchor. Sunday morning, my father tested the edges of the order. A car idled at the end of our block, the kind of rental you get with a corporate coat. He was on the sidewalk across from our building, hands behind his back like a man studying architecture, eyes not looking up. He stayed there for 3 minutes and 40 seconds, I know because my neighbor across the hall filmed it from his peephole and texted it to me with a single question mark. The police came. They didn't cuff him. They read the piece of paper. He nodded once, like the verdict of a contest he hadn't trained for, and got into the car and left. A case number landed in my inbox before lunch. I forwarded it to the lawyer and then went back to dicing carrots for soup because sometimes the only thing you can do is make something warm that feeds the people you love. In the middle of all of that, my boss called. I had written him before the hearing, just a short message with the facts, in case any noise broke the surface of my work. He didn't ask for details. He just said I could take the week and sign back on when my head felt like a room with windows again. He added that the company insurance covered more therapy than I realized. I hung up and stood at the sink and was embarrassed by how much it meant to have someone not ask me to perform contrition I've already done. My sister stayed the night on our couch under the old quilt. She stood in our kitchen in my wife's socks and made eggs and burned toast in the exact shape of Idaho. At noon she took a call and mouthed "Dad," then stepped out onto the stairwell and let it ring itself into nothing. When she came back in, she said she'd called her landlord and put her own name on her own lease. She said she'd started the paperwork to change her passwords and her direct deposit. She put her hand on the small of my son's back and said, very calmly, that she was not going to lose another decade to a dream that belonged to someone else. We drove her to the hardware store and made a key. This morning, the court stamped our name change final. We picked up the certified copies in a folder the color of wet clay. On the way out, a kid on a scooter blew past us and laughed because my son sneezed so hard his hat tilted sideways. We stood on the courthouse steps and said our family's full names again, all 3 of us, like an incantation that works because we decide it does. There are things I don't know. If my mother's key will ever fit a door she chooses, if my father will learn how to hold love without choking it into a shape he recognizes. I do know the judge's words, in that tired room, gave us the exact thing we came for: time. Space to be ordinary scared new parents who boil pacifiers and argue about the right way to fold fitted sheets. On our way home, we stopped at the park. There's a bench there with a plaque for a woman who loved Tuesdays. I held my son under an ash tree and told him we are a Tuesday family now. Not because anything grand happens, but because Tuesdays come and we choose them. His heartbeat thrummed against my chest, steady as a metronome. A squirrel scolded us for nothing in particular. Somewhere, I imagine, a man I used to think was made of iron is realizing there is more than one way to be strong, and that he is not invited to the easiest one anymore. We walked back to our building and up our stairs. The new name fit in my mouth like water. It tasted like something I didn't know I could have. Update 4. The Social Security office had fluorescent lights that hummed like tired bees. I balanced my son on my knee and filled out forms while a woman behind glass stamped dates with a rhythm that matched his hiccups. When they called our new last name, I stood up like someone had said my own. The clerk asked if I wanted to hyphenate. I said no, we wanted one word we all stood under. He smiled with just his eyes and slid back the paper that makes it real in the way institutions do. We left with a number that matches our mailbox and our bank and the sticky letters on the stroller. At the DMV, my son spat up on my shirt right before my photo, so now my license is half pride, half milk. I don't mind. It feels accurate. The hearing came like a dentist appointment you don't want but show up for anyway. The same judge, same carpet, a different tie, this one the red of an exit sign. My father had a pastor with him, and a man from his business who called himself an uncle in the community way, both with statements shaped like parables. My lawyer didn't raise his voice. He laid out the facts and the file and the memo with the part where my father said make the call and let the words hang by their own rope. The judge asked me 2 questions, how old is your son now, and what is his routine like? I told him, he sleeps, then doesn't, then smiles, then scares himself with his own sneeze. The judge looked at my father the way you look at a man still mid-swing when the bell has already rung. He denied the petition. He did it cleanly, with the legal words, and then he added this, culture is not custody. He used the phrase bad faith and he said fees. He extended the protective order for a year and made the file thick with dates so no one could say they forgot. We walked out into sun that felt like it had been waiting for us. My father didn't try to hand me anything this time. He stared past us as if the building could be persuaded to change its mind if he looked at it long enough. The pastor put a hand on his arm. My father shook it off like a fly and said something sharp in Mandarin that made the pastor blink. I don't know the word he used. I know the shape of it in his mouth. 2 days later a small thing arrived that wasn't small. A postcard with a watercolor of 3 lemons. No return address, just a P.O. box. My mother's handwriting sloped like a hill I used to roll down. The note read, I signed something that is only mine. I am learning utility accounts. I am very bad and very proud. That was it. No plea, no apology, just a new muscle flexing on paper. I put the card on our fridge with a magnet shaped like a pear. When I made tea, I glanced at it the way you look at a stove to be sure it's off. Quick, careful, ready to trust it soon. My sister texted a time and an address and a purple heart. Not her campus, not our parents' house. A storage unit with corrugated metal doors and hallways that smelled like rubber bands. I stayed home because the order is a wall I don't plan to test and because my job that day was to keep soup warm and my phone on the table, face up. She and her girlfriend loaded boxes in a car whose trunk doesn't like to stay up. She sent me a picture of the unit door rolled down and a lock with her own combo spun into place. Caption, the key fits. We didn't say what wouldn't be inside with the rest of her things, her wedding piano, the photograph my father keeps of himself at 19, any version of her that waits for permission. She came over after, sweaty and bright-eyed, and ate 2 bowls like she'd been hungry for hours she hadn't noticed. She slept until noon with her mouth open, the way our son does. We set up a 529 that afternoon. Clicking through forms felt like laying track before the train arrives. I typed our son's new last name and saw it populate next to words like beneficiary and future. Legacy can be a savings account with $25 in it and a note on the calendar to add more when we can. Legacy does not have to be a door you are pushed through. On Tuesday, we went to the Chinese bakery with the plexiglass cases and the auntie who refuses to take less than exact change even when the line goes out the door. I ordered pineapple bun and sesame balls and said my son's name to the cashier, the whole thing with the new last name, and her face lit in a way that will undo me for years. Good name, she said. Strong mouth. An older man at the next table broke a clementine in half and rolled one half toward our son with 2 fingers. For luck, he said, English cleaned by years of use. I gave him a nod my father taught me and meant it differently. We ate in the corner under a TV playing a soap opera where nobody looks at each other directly. I will teach my son numbers in Mandarin and how to write his characters bad and then better. I will tell him stories that do not require him to bend. We tried the chop on scrap paper first. I inked it and pressed too hard and made a blur that looked like a storm. My wife tried and made it too light, the lines ghostly. Then we did it together, my hand on hers, the stone square and sure, the stamp pressed straight down, straight up. The seal bloomed red and precise. We didn't mark any documents. We stamped the back of our grocery list and hung it on the fridge next to the lemons. When our son cares to ask, we will tell him what the stone is and where it came from and what we chose to use it for, not ownership, but evidence that hands can learn. My father tried to come at this sideways, through my workplace, of course. HR forwarded me an email with my name as if it were a docket number, asking if the company had policies about employees with admitted narcotics histories handling proprietary information. My boss replied before I could, looping me in only to let me see the speed. We do. Those policies are to support recovery and protect privacy. Your email will be retained per our legal policy. No signature, just the institutional firmness of a door closing politely. I sat for a minute at my desk and watched the cursor blink like a pulse. Then I took my son to the park and taught him the word leaf by letting one scratch the back of his hand. That night, the emergency phone buzzed once. A voice I barely recognized as my mother's left a message that was mostly air in one sentence. I opened a checking account with my own name and my own money. She laughed once, small and shocked, like the sound a glass makes when it remembers it's been set down gently. Then she hung up. I texted back the same words as before, proud of you anyway, and added 3 lemons so she knew I saw. We saw the pastor again on our block 3 days later, alone this time, standing by the hydrant like he was considering it. He didn't cross the street. He just lifted a hand in a half wave that asked for nothing and walked on. A courtesy to the order, maybe, a courtesy to himself. My neighbor texted me a photo of the empty sidewalk an hour after with the words, quiet is good. I wrote back, quiet Quiet is enough. We're ordinary in the spaces we fought to clear. I burned rice and my wife teased me like I'd committed a crime against her grandmother. Our son discovered his fist and spends entire minutes explaining it to himself. In therapy I said out loud that the jade didn't make me angry, it made me tired, and the tired is a kind of grief I didn't know I could survive. My therapist nodded and asked what rest looks like right now. Right now it looks like my wife and I on the couch with our feet under the same blanket, the baby monitor whispering, a form on the coffee table half filled and waiting. The judge's order sits in a folder next to our passports and the birth certificate with the name we chose. When I slide the folder shut, it makes a sound like a book closing. The story inside isn't over, but this chapter is. On the walk home from the bakery today, a squirrel dropped a peanut shell at my feet from a branch and scolded me for not being a bird. I laughed. It felt like Tuesday. It felt like choosing. Update 5. At 6:03 a.m., rain stitched the morning into lines and someone knocked like they'd practiced not to be heard. I opened the door to my mother with a carry-on suitcase and a grocery bag that said, "Thank you" in red block letters. Her hair was wet at the ends and there was a lemon rolling around at the bottom of the bag as if it had somewhere to be. She said, "I am sorry for your floor," and then she took off her shoes like a person who remembers rules even when she is breaking bigger ones. She didn't cry. She touched my son's foot like you test the flame on a stove. She handed me a Ziploc bag with the spare key from our house, their house, inside. The tag read Mom in my father's handwriting and she had scratched through it until the ink made a bruise. We made tea because there wasn't anything else to do with our hands. She said she had a lease that began today. She used the word "my" like it was new in her mouth. She asked if I could take her to file paperwork for safety, and then she ate a banana standing up by the sink, looking at the window like she could see the part of the sky where the year starts over. The courthouse had a metal detector that chirped at her bracelet. The clerk asked what language she preferred and she said English but slow, which seemed like the most honest answer anyone gives a form. The petition called it coercive control. There was a checkbox for no calls and no messages and no third parties, and she checked all three with a pen that kept hovering over the paper like a bird that can't decide where to land. The judge on duty signed a temporary order that made the air feel breathable. When we left, she folded the copy into a square so exact my geometry teacher would have applauded. The police met us for a civil standby. At the house, the lemon oil on the sideboard had a smell that took me back and then threw me forward again. My mother walked from room to room touching edges, the frame where a photograph used to be, the dent in a door she said was from 1998 when someone slammed it because of a spelling test I failed. She filled her bag with the smallest keepings, her sewing kit, 2 photo albums, the rice cooker she refuses to replace because it has figured out our family's idea of done. In the kitchen, a magnet held up a photocopy of the family tree. Our branch had been whited out again, thicker this time, the paper scarred by it. She didn't take it down. She took a pair of shears instead. The accountant my father calls uncle was in the driveway when we came out, a man who looks like a wallet in sweat. He kept his eyes on his shoes and held out a manila envelope to my mother like it might bite him. Inside were copies of loans with her name ghosted where it shouldn't be, signatures that looked enough like hers to work on a Tuesday morning and not under a lamp. She didn't say anything, she just slid the papers back and held them with 2 hands like you hold something you plan to put down somewhere safe and then slam shut. Back at our apartment, we put her phone on the table and bought a new one at a store that smelled like plastic and maybe oranges if you wanted to think so. The cashier asked what name to put on the account and my mother said her first and last like a person crossing a border. She ate leftover noodles with chopsticks that didn't match and told me very calmly that she was going to get a bank account, then a checking account, then an account that is just for small happy purposes, like plants. My wife asked what kind. My mother said, "I think pothos. They do not die if you go away for a little bit." At noon, an investigator from the DA's office called me, case number clipped and tidy, to ask if we would come in and play the memo from my sister's phone on their equipment. We sat in a room that smelled like dry paper and old coffee while a woman with a pen behind her ear listened to my father's voice say make the call and then say it again when no one answered like the first time didn't count. She didn't tell us what they would do. She didn't have to. She took a statement like someone who knows the difference between noise and evidence. That afternoon, my sister sent a location drop, a building with doors the color of pennies. She had 2 friends and a dolly and her girlfriend with a tape gun. She texted me a picture of herself in front of a mailbox cluster with her own key sticking out like a flag. Caption: first mail was a coupon. We cheered from the couch and my son sneezed so hard his sock twisted and we called that participation. Later, she came over and lay on the rug with the baby on her stomach and said, "I told him," and by him she meant our father, and by told she meant the part of her he won't try to fold. She said she was going anyway. She said she had an offer to spend a summer in a lab 3 states away and she was going to say yes. We didn't talk about passports or permission. We talked about sunblock and a cheap fan and the way a cat will find the only sun in a room. 2 days into my mother living on the far side of the order, the pastor knocked on our building's front door and then stood outside with his hands visible like he had read a manual. We met him on the stoop, my wife on one side and the stroller on the other. He said, "I wrote the court to withdraw my statement," and he said he had had the jade on his desk since the day at the courthouse, because he couldn't stand to see it swinging there, luck making a joke of itself. He pressed it to my mother's palm as gently as anyone has ever given her anything and said, "I confused proximity with care." My mother put the jade in her pocket without looking at it. The pastor did not ask to pray. He walked away without finishing sentences. It was the cleanest thing he could have done. On Friday, I picked up a copy of the local Chinese weekly from the bakery. There on page 5 was a letter to the editor with my father's name under it, polite and barbed, the kind of thing a man writes when he thinks letters are spears. There were words like responsibility and tradition in a paragraph that circled back to itself like it had lost the map. Auntie behind the counter glanced down, clucked once, pulled a Sharpie from the cash drawer and drew one blue line through his name, not hard enough to tear the paper. "We don't need story like this with our buns," she said in English and then turned to the next customer. I folded the page and slid it into the folder my lawyer calls running tallies. He added it to the file and used a word I haven't heard in a while, contempt. Sometimes the legal terms are exactly the emotional ones and it's almost funny. My boss forwarded me an email that had gone to HR and then been strangled there. Same tactic as before, different angle, a question about whether my job had oversight for individuals who present addictive risk profiles. HR answered with the speed of a trapdoor, "We have policies. They serve recovery and protect employees. Your concern has been recorded." I made a sandwich and thought about how much of my life now is ordinary, bread that tears a little when the knife is too dull, an inbox that contains more coupons than crisis. My mother brought over 3 lemons in a brown paper sack and a packet with a bank logo and said, "Proud and breathless, signature card." She held up her practice paper like a first grader and we stamped the corner with the chop, not because it meant anything to the bank but because it meant something to us. The red square sat in the bottom right like a period. We showed her how to click a bill and pay it, how to freeze her credit, how to set a password that is not his mother's birthday. She took notes on a tiny spiral notebook she pulled from her purse and at the top of the page she wrote, "Lessons for Ordinary." When she left, she texted a picture of her new place, a little kitchen shaped like a shoebox, a pothos already throwing a lazy vine toward the window. She wrote, "I changed the light bulb. It is bright. It makes me a little brave." Saturday morning, 2 officers knocked to tell us a summons had been served for a hearing next month on charges related to the false report. Misdemeanor letters in a row, the kind that sting without ending a person. They asked if we needed an escort to the car. We didn't. I packed my son into a sling and we walked to the park. A squirrel hurled a seed husk at a pigeon and then glared at me like I orchestrated it. The bench with the woman who loved Tuesdays looked the same. I said good morning to the plaque, and my son laughed with his whole gums. We said our names out loud again, all of them, including my Chinese given name, and I told him what the stamp says. He grabbed my lip and said something that was almost a syllable and that counts. My father tested the shape of the order with a letter that was all legal and no heart, challenging the protective order in a way that sounded like a man arguing with a measuring cup. The court set a date. Our neighbor texted us a photo of the empty sidewalk with a thumbs up emoji. Quiet is still enough. It is more than enough. That night, my mother called the emergency phone and left a message that was 11 seconds long. I changed my voter registration. I had to ask where to go. I found it. She laughed and it was the sound of a glass set down gently again. I sent back 3 lemons, then a green heart, then the word anyway. Today, my son rolled from stomach to back like a magic trick performed for an audience of 2 in a plant. We clapped like fools. We stamped the date on the calendar with the chop and the red bled a little through the paper because I still pressed too hard. We ate sesame noodles and argued about the right amount of garlic and then kissed with it anyway. My sister texted us a picture of her girlfriend kissing her temple in a kitchen with a new tea kettle and a cat shaped like a comma. Caption, Tuesdays on a Wednesday. We are building a family that makes sense in the light. On our way home from the bakery, a kid on a skateboard hollered complimented our stroller like it was a dog. The pastor passed us on the corner, nodded once, and kept going. In my pocket, the chop knocked softly against my thigh like a heartbeat. Upstairs, my mother's spare key sat in a dish by our door like a punctuation mark that can be both an ending and the start of something. The new name still fits in my mouth like water. It still tastes like something I didn't know I could have. I keep choosing it. I keep choosing us. It is enough that we get to be ordinary and brave in a way that doesn't require anyone else's permission. It is enough that Tuesdays keep coming, and we get to say we are here.